What I want to talk about really today is about the importance of failure and what failure has meant to me. We'll start with the train crash. Oops. I mean, that's a classic example of when things can go wrong. What I want to really get to is what we can learn from failure and how failure is essential for success. So innovation. I'm going to talk about innovation and ideas and what we do with ideas, because I believe that innovation is turning an idea into something. I'm a designer. My role is to work with ideas, to generate ideas, and then to translate those ideas into something meaningful. In my case, products, or it could be a website, it could be a piece of graphic design. Now, ideation, the idea of coming up with, imagining and conceiving and forming of ideas, is critical to this. And critical to this is learning how to fail. So this is Thomas Edison. What's he famous for? Are you allowed to speak up? Unmute your microphones and unmute your, and let me know. Does anyone can shout out what Thomas Edison's most famous for?
Did he invent the light bulb?
Indeed. He had the first light bulb moment. So he thought it up, he drew it, and he came up with a light bulb. But it wasn't as easy. He had 1,900 failures en route to that light bulb. The rumour is it's over 2,000 attempts in order for it to actually finally work. So I'd actually argue, whilst he's the third most prolific inventor, he had more patents until a decade ago than anyone in the world. I'd argue he's the world's most prolific failure. He failed more often than anyone else, and it was all recorded because he had over 3 million pages in his journals, and each one recorded when things didn't quite work. But he developed this idea of an ideas factory. He translated those ideas which didn't work and applied them with other ideas which didn't work, brought them together, and lo and behold, out popped something brand new. So with 1,093 patents still in existence today, that's pretty amazing. He looks a bit grumpy there. I wonder why. We'll talk about how failure leads to success. But on the notion of patent holders, this is Keir Silverbrook. He is the world's most prolific inventor. He has more patents than anyone else in the world. Okay, unmute microphones and tell me, where do you reckon he's from? Anyone? There's a clue in the picture behind him.
Australia.
Australia, from Sydney, indeed. He is just in North Ryde. How many people knew that, I wonder? I asked my staff and I asked my students, and I teach to a class of 350 students. No one knew that Australia has got the world's most prolific inventor. I found it interesting also that an Australian got the Nobel Prize for Physics last year. And again, no one knew his name. They could name every sort of football code finalists. They knew who won the AFL, the NRL, even the badminton. They could tell me how many Olympic medals were won in swimming, for instance, but they couldn't tell me that we had the world's most prolific inventor. And to be proud of the fact that innovation, inventing, and coming up with ideas, Australia are doing fantastically well. And the world knows about it, but Australians don't. I find that interesting. Back to Thomas Edison though. Now he said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. It's basically a lot of hard work. It's all very well coming up with an idea, but it's doing the work behind that to make it succeed. It's not just having that light bulb moment, it's actually translating that through all of these drawings, through all of these little experiments in order to get something to work. I love this. If I find 10,000 ways something won't work, I haven't failed. I am not discouraged, because every wrong attempt discarded is another step forward. And this is the important things within the science tradition and within engineering and also within design. We learn to fail. Now IDEO, which is probably one of the largest design and engineering consultancies in the world, have got this maxim, this belief, and they say fail early and fail often in order to succeed sooner. You want to know if you're going along the wrong path very quickly, and the sooner you can do that, the sooner you realise it's the wrong path, the better. You can backstep and go on the right path. And so part of IDEO's philosophy when they come up and design things is to learn to fail. and learn to see how we can test whether something's going to work or not in order to move it forward. Now, you probably have heard of IBM, but IBM was at one point the largest computer company in the world, and they ruled the roost for quite a long time. Now, Thomas Watson's got a couple of interesting things. Most people remember a particular quote. This one, in 1943, he said, "I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers." There's probably 5 computers in my house, if I think about it. And this is how we've sort of not really seen the market opportunity. And so this is one of IBM's failings, perhaps, to not see the potential of where computers could go. IBM have changed their approach and what they're doing. They're still in the marketplace. There are other companies that have gone bankrupt because they haven't seen the opportunity. They've failed to recognize the opportunity which change brings. Now, Mr. Watson here actually came up with this really neat idea, think. He actually trademarked the word think. And this is actually looked at within their notepads and various of their computers, the think tablet. I love this. He put the word up and blazoned it on every office, and it said just the word think. And he said the most conspicuous wall of every room in every IBM building had the word think on it. And each employee carried a little notebook. I've got a little black book which I always sketch and little draw and doodle in, and I take it everywhere. And I think that that's quite interesting, and I sort of learned from this approach that Mr. Watson had at IBM to say, keep ideas written down. You don't know when idea is going to happen, just keep a note of it. Failure, in my perspective, is forgetting to put these things down. I'll remember it later, and knowing me, I always forget. Another thing I want to sort of get to sort of a personal level and sort of get into my story of what I was actually going to call this talk Why I'm a Failure, but as my students pointed out, they already knew why I was a failure. So instead, I'm just going to tell you about one little exercise I did when I was at university. In my 3rd year of university, I entered into a design competition. It was a national competition in the UK, and I came second. I always had this habit of coming second, never came first. I never backed myself. I'm not saying I would have come first, I'm just saying I didn't back myself with my key ideas. So my idea, well, I was doing a fax machine. You probably don't really know what fax machines were, but bear in mind this was before the advent of the World Wide Web. I designed this thing in 1992, the World Wide Web arrived in 1993. I had this idea of a fax machine. It's a bit like a computer though. You send pieces of paper, scans it, sends it off to another fax machine. And I had this idea to use an aluminium shell and use paper mache over it as a way of actually coming up with a material covering. I told my lecturer, I said, look, I've got this idea. And he said, oh, no, it wouldn't work. No, it's unproven. Go with injection molding. Go with what we know. You're good at that. Do that. I went, oh, okay. Guess what? The winner was commended for their idea of using a pressed aluminium shell with a paper mache covering. They loved the fact that this used paper to fax things to it, and it was made of paper. It was brilliant. And I was going, oops. So I've learned a few things from this. And it's not always don't listen to your teacher. It's sort of listen to your teacher, evaluate what your teacher says, and sort of say, well, what do I believe? Does this marry? Get advice from other people. And sort of think, well, wait a sec, why was I afraid to not actually do that and follow through? And I think I was afraid of failing. I was really paranoid of failing. And it was this notion of I didn't take the risk of going, no, I'm going to do this. Because I think if my lecturer said, okay, fair enough, good on you, go for it. And that is, I think, the most important thing I took out of that. And I'll come to another few lessons that I learned from that exercise in my final year of university. Number one is take risks. From there on in, I took risks. And more often than not, I'd land on my feet. Don't be afraid of failing. Ask for help. If you don't know something, ask others and they may be able to help you out with it. So asking for help is absolutely crucial. And I like this. Larry basically says that I consider asking for help a sign not of weakness, but of self-confidence. The ability to actually go into someone, it could be your teacher, it could be your mate, it could be your parents, it could be a friend of a friend, who actually says, look, I've got this idea, what do you think? Well, I don't know how to do this. And if they can sort of say, well, have you tried this? It's not a sign of your weakness, it's the sign that you're actually are self-confident enough to actually ask the right questions. Don't pretend that you know everything. I see that a lot in university. Those people who are humble enough to say, how do I do this? I've got the most respect for. Persevere. Don't give up. Prove your idea. Find ways in which you can make it work. And often when I come up with an idea, it's just an idea. But if I can take that idea, experiment with it, work out before I take it to my boss, work out whether it will work or not, try and find out some evidence for it. Perhaps I might look in some other books, or perhaps I'll look through other patents and find out, actually, this has got some legs. There is some, we don't quite know, but we've got, based on this other information, this might actually work. So the idea of proving your ideas before you present them is a really, really valuable one. Otherwise, people will knock you down before it's even got a leg in. Don't be so timid. That's my lesson. It's taken me about 30 years to learn that one, but I'm getting there. Now, comfort isn't always a good thing. Many of you might be looking at you, yeah, you look fairly athletic and sporting types. This is the idea of sitting on the couch is not really good for your own fitness. And it's the same with your mind. If you had a personal trainer or a coach who was saying, come on, give me some press-ups and let's run harder, push you harder over this hurdle, let's do more and more and more, you need to do more training, you might be exhausted by it. It may not be that comfortable. Occasionally it might be painful and you're out of breath when you're having to do those running. But when you come to play that match, when you come to perform in competitions against others in sports, you know that all of that effort, all of that input in the gym or in training has been worthwhile. It's the same with your mind. So I see a lot of people who just go, oh, it's too hard, I'll just do this. They won't work on the sums because it's easier to just play on this game, or it's easier to do that. So sometimes we've got to do some challenging and difficult things, but getting out of that comfort zone is absolutely crucial in order to build up our mental fitness in order to challenge and take on problems. And I think that's something really important about success. The other thing is discover your own limits. What are you good at? What are you not so good at? Admit where you're not so good at. You either work on that to get some others' help in there, or you find that this is something which is great for someone else who can do that. I was really crap at maths at school. I understood physics. Forgive me saying crap. Sorry, I should have had a warning on there. I was really bad at maths. I didn't understand why I was doing it. I really understood physics. I don't know why. I did really well in physics. Somehow, I guess I'm a visual spatial learner. I like to play with things. I like to pull things apart. I was the kid doodling at the back. And I actually found someone who looked at my drawings and said, well, wait a sec, that's actually quite a skill. Develop up that skill of drawing, and here is a way in which you can use drawing to understand the maths. And I went, really? Yes, you could draw it in this way, and then you can, and I'm going, wow, cool. And I realized that there's a part of my limits. Not so good with numbers, but good visually. And I could use that to accommodate my understanding of maths. And since then, I've become an associate head of School of Engineering, and I've become working with engineers and working with scientists and so on. So I can get that now, but I come from my perspective. Another key one is taking responsibility for yourself. You own your work, and consequently, you're responsible for yourself, knowing though that others will always be willing to help. That's wonderful. There's so many generous people out there. I've met the most wonderful people who are always willing to give you a chance and give you a helping hand. That comes back to all of those things wrapped up. Don't be timid, give it a go, try a little bit harder. But if you can take responsibility for your directions, that can make a massive difference. And I have my own personal maxim. This is how I deal with difficult employees, it's how I deal with difficult situations, it's how I deal with my life when things are not going in the direction I want. So long as I'm learning, sometimes there's stuff I don't want to learn, sometimes I'm being exposed to things I really didn't want to know about. However, so long as I'm learning, I'm growing. And hence, I work at a university and it is fantastic. Every day I'm learning new things. Our maxim at our university is for lifelong learning, and I figure that's quite true. It's quite true. Now, back to this competition idea. This is really why I think I'm a bit of a failure. I came up with this idea for sending faxes to other people in the world, but not sending it from one fax machine to another fax machine. I came up with this idea where you'd send a fax into what I called a cloud. I suggested that you'd send this fax in digital format into this cloud. You'd have a computer somewhere and we'd call it a cloud computer, and we'd send it up into the X25 backbone network cloud. Sound all very posh and technical, but effectively would send these things into the cloud, and then someone would come along with a card and stick their card into any public fax machine, and it would retrieve things off the cloud to the card. Big deal. Well, this was before the World Wide Web. And I want to tell you a little bit of the story. I was interviewed for this and they loved this idea. Now, Clive Grinier was a partner in a company called Tangerine Design. He now sort of has headed up the design council. He's a wonderful man, very, very nice, very, very generous with his time. But as a competition judge, he looked at the work and loved the technology, loved these ideas. And for quite a while, my work was sat in his design office with other partners. There were some other partners in that mix. One of the other partners, there were four. There was David Tong, there was Clive, there was, I can't remember the other guy, but there's this other guy called Jonathon Ive. So the four partners of Tangerine Design. After this competition, because I didn't go with a paper mache shell over this aluminium, the other guy did. He won the competition, I came second. But at the end of it, I was invited in by Clive to say, look, we've just got a new premises, so love you to come in and have a look round. We'd love to show you around and perhaps give you a tryout. And I went, oh, thank you very much. Very politely, and then went away and didn't do anything about it. And I told other people this, you idiot. They're giving you an opportunity to sort of get a foot in the door in this company, and they're good. The reason why they got new premises, they had a new client. You might have heard of them. They're called Apple. Jonathon Ive then went off to become Senior Vice President of Design at Apple, where he linked in with a guy called Steve Jobs. You might have heard of him. And they came up with all sorts of wonderful products. Now, this is where I kick myself and go, I could have been in there. And then I got back thinking, and I gave this lecture last year to my students, and I was going through, and I actually looked at my original sort of work, and I saw, oh, this idea of this cloud computing stuff, X25 backbone network cloud, has been sat on Jonathon Ive's desk and office in their thing as they're judging this competition back in 1992. Bugger. Sorry, but that's what I thought. So hence, this is why I'm a failure. Now, I'm not suggesting that I invented cloud computing, far from it, but I did sort of propose some ideas and I never backed myself. I never really followed through. And I'm saying what could have been, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life thinking what could have been. Oh, I could have been working with Jonathon Ive at Apple. When I was teaching in New Zealand, one of the students has gone on and he actually works with Jonathon Ive at Apple, and a number of my students are working at some very, very prestigious companies around the world. So partly I'm trying to inspire them to think about what opportunities they may have. Let's go on to Steve Jobs. He's probably one of my heroes, and very, very sad that he died early. But in his sort of short life, he achieved some amazing things. And the common link is failure. He sort of has personified failure in the most spectacular way. Here's what I mean. He started off at setting up Apple. He dropped out of university. I shouldn't say that, should I? But he dropped out of university to set up Apple with his other friend, John Wozniak. And remember that Think trademark from IBM? Their slogan was Think Different. Clever. They're going to be a different computer company. And instead of this sort of austere beige computer, they came up with bright colours. And they called it Apple. Well, the story of Apple is really interesting because they were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So Steve Jobs goes and employs one of the guys from Pepsi Cola and says, look, can you manage our business? So he comes in and manages the business. Guess what he does? After 3 months, he fires Steve Jobs. The guy, the new CEO, comes in to run the company, actually fires the very person who founded the company and actually hired him in the first place. So what does he do? Well, Steve Jobs is a bit disgruntled by it, but he goes off and sets this other company up called Next. You probably wouldn't have heard of Next Computing, but you probably would have heard of what happened from Next Computing. So there's this guy called Tim Berners-Lee, and in 1990, he had a little play on a Next computer. And he began sort of developing some things which led to the development of the World Wide Web, which you probably would have heard of. So Tim Berners-Lee's invention was all based around a Next computer. There's another thing that Next computers did. They're far more powerful than any other computer. They're brilliant. They had this incredible ability to render and produce these beautiful images. And they wanted to show how they could do that. So some guys in the company began developing, I'll skip that, you don't need to know what that's about. They began to sort of play with this, and they developed these little animations to showcase what the computer could do and how powerful it was. And they came up with this little animation of a little angle poised lamp bouncing around. But everyone loved the little animation more than they loved the computers, and so, well, a spin-out company called Pixar was developed. So Steve Jobs developed this company called Pixar. You might have heard of them, from everything from A Bug's Life to Toy Story to you name it. I love it. I can't stop watching them. But after Pixar sort of went, they had a bit of a wrangle with Disney over some of their animators working with her. He ended up selling it off to Disney for an incredible amount of money and was invited back into Apple. And he said, right, forget what we're doing. We're going to go back to what we initially did. We're going to design and make the best computers. And we're going to stop making all these other things, go back to our core business. And lo and behold, that's exactly what he did. Now, Apple is the world's richest company. I think that's amazing. Another story about Apple, I like to think. Sony. Now, in my day, Sony owned entertainment. Sony had this Sony Walkman, and they were fantastic. This was mobile music. It was awesome. There's an interesting story about the Sony Walkman. It was actually to be a shared music device, so that two people could share music, and it was all about sharing music. But lo and behold, when it went into the market, people unplugged one set of earphones and just created this idea of personal stereo, personal music. Now, Sony owned this market for a very long time. And I don't know whether it's true or not, but I like to think this, that when Sony began to sort of diversify their interests, when they began to enter into other people's territory, something significant happened. Now, Masaru Ibuka, the sort of founder or co-founder of Sony, said that we do what others don't. That was their maximum. My maxim is, so long as I'm learning, theirs is we do what others don't. And so long as they did what others didn't do, they ruled. They were absolutely king of entertainment and electronics and so on. The difference is they began to forget their maxim, we do what others don't, and begin to do what others did. They began to develop computers. They came up with this computer called the VAIO. And lo and behold, I like to think that that was treading on the toes of a company called Apple, who had developed laptops and said, okay, you own personal music and personal entertainment. Here, try this out. Here's the iPod. Now, very, very few people have got any other music device than an iPod or an iPhone or an anything now. And I like to think that that's because it's holding true to your own values and what you believe in. Tom Peters, a business sort of person, says that nothing is more important or beneficial for individuals or organisations than sort of screwing up, than actually making a mistake, because mistakes render, if you knew that you're succeeding, you not knowing what was it that was actually the good bit of it. When you fail, it's quite clear this bit didn't work. That's really, really valuable. Story of Lego. This is not so much a story of failure as opportunity. Their maxim is to nurture the child in each of us. I love that. It's the idea that it's not solely a child who is interested in Lego, particularly when the majority of people who buy Lego are parents and grandparents and uncles. It's sort of an adult generation who buy Lego for their kids. Why? Well, it's because we like to play with it too. We like to be kids playing with Legos. I think it's the only reason why I had kids. Now, old Kirk Christensen, he was a ladder maker, but he lost his job during the Depression in the 1930s. So he started making wooden toys to make a living, and people quite liked his wooden toys. So much so, he had a factory, but unfortunately that factory burnt down in 1942, so he had to rebuild it. And instead of rebuilding it in timber, he sort of thought, well, there's this new material called plastic, let's give that a try. And lo and behold, they started using plastics to make these toys, and lo and behold, Lego as a company was formed. And most people have, I think there's one piece per every, no, there's 2 pieces for every child in the world now. So you need to get a few friends together around the world to put Lego together. Sir Ken Robinson, I'm quite a fan of Sir Ken Robinson and what he believes, and I've actually got a YouTube clip, but I won't play it, but I've got a little link there if you want to click on it. There's a little 10-minute video about education and what it's doing wrong and what it's doing right. It's got this lovely quote that imagination underpins every unique human achievement. Imagination led us from caves to cities, from bone clubs to golf clubs, from carrion to cuisine, and from superstition to science. He talks of the importance of failure in his little YouTube clip. So if you get a chance, have a look at what he believes is the failure of education and where the successes of self-belief and actually doing what you are good at and how that can be nurtured in us. Another one that I'm very fan of, the author Douglas Adams, again, stolen from The World Too Young. But he said, flying is learning to throw yourself at the ground and miss. Well, we gave this a try. I got out of my comfort zone and we entered into the Red Bull Flugtag. So I won't play all of this, but yes, that's us crashing off the Sydney Harbour. The water tastes horrible, by the way. Don't do it much. So a friend of mine at the University of Western Sydney said, hey, look, let's give this a go. So we came up with this idea for an aircraft, and we wanted to put an aircraft into an envelope, a flat pack plane, which we came out, we unconcertinaed our plane, wrapped it in Glad wrap, and then launched ourselves into Sydney Harbour. Yes, it seemed like a good idea at the time. But it's the idea of just letting go, having fun. And what I've learned from this project is not only about project management, it's how to actually get things to work, and each time we'd break something, we'd try it again, and somehow fun drove us to keep on going. But we can learn a lot from observation. My key hero is Leonardo da Vinci. If he was around, he wouldn't be an engineer, I think he'd be a designer, because he sort of got this human perspective. He could draw pretty well, apparently. He could make things, and he was fascinated with things like biology, looking inside the body and how it worked and what he could learn from it. And many of these sorts of things, he sort of came up with everything from a helicopter. They just didn't have the materials to make it work, and early flying aircraft and so on. But it sort of took some others a century ago to look at the pioneering aspects and actually make flight happen. There's a wonderful video of a YouTube clip if you want to have a look at some of the sort of failures of flight. And we can learn a lot from mistakes. Here's a de Havilland Comet. Now this fell out of the sky, unfortunately. It was the first jet airliner, commercial jet airliner, and it would go up and it would fall out of the sky. I usually ask my students why this is the case, but I'll just tell you, it had square windows, and that was its problem. And no one really believes me until you realise that if you look at the engineering of a square window, and bear in mind it's really cold up in there, very high, and it's sort of warm on the ground, this is constantly getting warm and cold, and it shrinks and contracts. And at the corner of the window, often a crack would begin. And where that crack would begin, when it's up in at very high, it would then catastrophically fail, and unfortunately these comets sort of fell out of the sky. But we've also had Concorde, you know, the supersonic commercial airliner, but we've gone almost too far in some of these things, and we've stepped back to learn from it. Concorde is no longer flying. They realise it's too risky, it's too expensive to do, and the same within Formula One, the same with the Javelin. The world record for the Javelin is now shorter than it used to be because the technology got so impressive that it sort of moved away from the core idea of what that event was. Same in Formula One racing. The cars which are going around the tracks now are slower than they were 15 years ago, but they're a lot more safe. So we're having fewer people dying in that sport, which is a great thing, but it's also still pushing to the limits of materials and science. We can learn a lot. If you want to look at this one, this is fantastic, Tacoma Narrows Bridge. The engineers forgot about wind and the fact that it would fly through this and begin to raise and lower. And this bridge literally, after 4 years of construction, shook itself apart within 3 months of it being built. We learned a lot from this. And engineering is a lot about learning from failures. I want to sort of begin to wrap up now and have time for questions. what all of this sort of gets to is failure isn't about sort of falling down. It's not sort of not succeeding. It's if you stay there. So failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. I love that. This is actually part of a song. I quite like this song. And it's interesting to sort of think that there's a truism there. Edison didn't give up, he kept on going. 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. It takes a lot of hard work to get the idea to succeed. It takes getting up off the ground when you've tripped up and begin again. So just think of a toddler learning to walk. If they fell over, began crying and didn't ever get up, we would never evolve, we'd never be running, and we'd never get anywhere. But the toddler gets up, cries a little bit, parents are there to nurture him, little brother go, oh, you're okay. And that's what the world will do. We'll help and support you get it back up and help you on your way so that you can run and improve. Won't mention Project Sappho, it's just a boring thing which actually says all the companies that did this succeeded, here's how they recognise it. And I'll skip through this idea of Ashley Brilliant. I love some of his little things about, these are where some failures can happen, like if you're shaving someone with a cutthroat razor, this is where doing it wrong fast is very problematic. Anyway, you can have a look at those if you've got access to these via this thing. And Francis Watkins Harper, I think I'll leave close on this one. Apparent failure may hold in its rough shell the germs of a success that will blossom in time and bear fruit throughout eternity. I'll let you have a look through the 3M story in your own time. 3M, a wonderful company, you know them from the post-it note, you know how they wish to sort of develop sort of some great products. But the post-it note took a long time before it was a success. So it took a good 12 years and 13 years from inception of the idea and the product was out there to it actually having its time and people going, that is a fantastic product. So sometimes patience is also a virtue. I'll skip him too, because I'm aware of time. And I'll leave you on a Truman Capote quote. Failure is the condiment that gives success its flavour.